The HOA sent a contractor to saw up my driveway at 7:10 inches the morning. I let him unload the saw before I showed him the one county map that made him stop cold. That is the part people usually want me to tell first. They want the moment with the orange paint, the concrete saw, the HOA president standing at the curb with his little folder, and the contractor looking at me like I had just made his morning a lot more expensive. But that morning did not start with the saw. It started with a cropped map. And if there is one thing 31 years in county records taught me, it is that a cropped map is usually not an accident. Sometimes it is laziness. Sometimes it is confidence. Sometimes it is somebody hoping the other person will not know what is missing. My name is Marianne Vale. I am 62 years old, retired from the county records office, and I live in a one-story house at the end of Briar Glen Court, which is the kind of street people describe as quiet because they have never attended one of our HOA meetings. The driveway in front of my house is a little wider than the others. Not dramatic. Not a commercial lot. Not a parking pad for 6 cars. Just a concrete apron that flares out near the curb before narrowing back toward the garage. If you drove past it, you would probably not notice. If you were the kind of person who measured other people's driveways from a golf cart, you might. Russell Pike noticed. Russell was the president of the Briar Glen Homeowners Association. He was a former regional sales manager, and he had that particular kind of public confidence that made people feel handled before they realized they had not been heard. He wore pressed polos with the HOA logo on the sleeve, kept his sunglasses on his head indoors, and used phrases like community standard and cooperative spirit when he meant do what I said. The first time I saw the orange paint, the morning was still cool. I had the kitchen window open because the dishwasher was making a sound I did not like, and I was trying to decide whether it was a real problem or just a machine getting older with me. A white pickup rolled to a stop in front of my house. Then another truck. Then a small trailer with a concrete saw strapped to it. 2 men stepped out. One of them wore a neon vest. The other, older and heavier through the shoulders, walked around to the trailer and checked the tie-down strap. He moved like a man who had done physical work long enough not to waste motion. Russell Pike got out of a dark SUV behind them. That is when I set my coffee down. Not quickly. Not dramatically. I just set it down. Because you learn over time that the first useful thing in a bad situation is a steady hand. Russell pointed toward the driveway. The man in the vest opened a can of orange marking paint and shook it. The rattle carried all the way through my kitchen window. He walked to the edge of the apron, bent down, and sprayed a straight line across the concrete where my driveway widened. 1 line, then a second. The saw stayed on the trailer for another minute. Then the older man lowered the ramp. I took the blue folder from the small table by the door. It was not the whole file. The whole file was too thick for a morning conversation. This was the short version: recorded plat, maintenance agreement, permit record, county email, and the HOA's own cropped exhibit. I walked outside while they were still unloading. Russell saw me first. He lifted one hand in a greeting that was almost polite. "Marianne," he said. I was hoping we could avoid making this difficult. That sentence told me nearly everything I needed to know. People who arrive with a saw at 7:10 inches the morning are not trying to avoid difficulty. They are trying to arrive before witnesses. I looked past him to the contractor. "Are you Leon Briggs?" I asked. The older man straightened. "Yes, Mom. Before that saw touches my driveway, I need to ask you one question." Russell shifted. "This has already been approved by the board." I kept my eyes on Leon. "Do you have written indemnity from the association for cutting into a recorded county stormwater inspection access?" The driveway went very quiet. Not silent. There were birds in the live oak across the street. A delivery truck somewhere 2 blocks over. The little metallic tick of the saw cooling in the shade. But the work stopped. Leon looked at the orange line, then at Russell, then back at me. "A what?" he said. That was the first honest thing anyone had said about my driveway in 6 weeks. To understand how we got there, you need to understand what my driveway actually was. When Paul and I bought that house, the driveway was one of the things he liked most. Not because it was pretty. Paul did not care about concrete unless it was cracked badly enough to trip him. He liked it because it made practical sense. You can back out without kissing the mailbox, he said the first day we stood in front of the place. The house sat at the top of a gentle slope, behind the back fence. The yards dropped toward a drainage swale that ran behind 3 homes before emptying into a concrete culvert near Briar Glen Drive. During a normal rain, it was nothing. During a hard rain, it became a shallow brown ribbon that carried leaves, sand, and whatever else the neighborhood forgot to keep out of it. The county had recorded an inspection access route years before our HOA became as energetic as it later became. The access point started at my driveway apron, crossed the side setback, and followed a utility strip toward the drainage line. That was why my driveway flared, near the curb. A county vehicle did not park there every week, or even every year, but the access had to remain usable. I knew that because I read the plat before closing. Some people read neighborhood brochures. I read recorded documents. After 3 decades in county records, I did not trust summaries when the original page was available for $3 and a little patience. Paul used to tease me about it. He built a small file drawer in the breakfast nook because, as he put it, my wife will sleep better if the subdivision has its own index. He was right. I had folders for the deed, the roof warranty, appliance manuals, utility easements, old survey notes, and the drainage maintenance agreement that everyone else forgot existed until water started standing in their yard. Paul died 4 years after we moved in. I am not going to turn this into a story about grief. Grief is not a plot device. It is more ordinary than that. It is the second coffee mug you stop taking down. The porch light you still turn on at dusk because somebody always used to come in through the garage. The little cedar drawer label in his handwriting that says, House, Permits and Plats. That drawer is why Russell Pike did not get my driveway. The first notice came on a Thursday. Cream paper. HOA letterhead. A tone that tried to be neighborly and official at the same time. Dear Ms. Vale, it began. The association has observed an unapproved driveway expansion, inconsistent with Briar Glen frontage uniformity standards. There were 3 photographs attached, all taken from the street, all angled to make the apron look wider than it was. The last page included a map image with a red circle around the front of my lot. The circle was not the problem. The crop was... The image stopped just before the drainage access notation. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at that page for a long time. Not because I was confused, because I was deciding whether the omission was careless or chosen. The letter gave me 30 days to submit a correction plan or remove the non-conforming concrete at my own expense. I wrote back the same afternoon. 3 pages. Polite. Numbered. Boring in the way useful letters are boring. I included the recorded plat page, the drainage maintenance agreement, the original driveway permit, a photo of the county access marker near the side fence, and a note explaining that the apron predated the current HOA frontage rule and served a recorded inspection purpose. I sent it through the HOA portal. Then I sent the same packet by certified mail. People sometimes ask why I did both. The answer is simple. Portals are convenient until a record disappears. Certified mail is not elegant, but it has a receipt. For 11 days, nothing happened. Then the portal status changed from received to insufficient documentation. No explanation. No request for clarification. Just 2 words, posted at 6:42 p.m. On a Sunday evening. Insufficient documentation. That was the first moment I understood this was not about my driveway being misunderstood. This was about someone deciding not to understand it. 2 days later, my neighbor Nate Calder knocked on my side door. Nate lived downhill, 2 houses past the bend, in a gray house with a magnolia tree that dropped leaves, exactly where he did not want them. He was in his 40s, a quiet man, the kind who apologized before asking for help, even when help was reasonable. He held his phone in one hand and his ball cap in the other. "Marianne," he said, "is the HOA really making you remove that driveway edge? They are trying." He looked toward the street, even though nobody was there. "That access route runs behind my place, doesn't it? It runs behind yours and the Carsons." He nodded slowly. "I thought so." Then he showed me the photos. His backyard, after the last hard rain. Water standing halfway across the patio. Leaves packed against the culvert screen. A county truck parked near my driveway from 2 years earlier when they had cleared the swale after a storm. "I don't want trouble with Russell," Nate said. "I'm still waiting on approval for the fence replacement." That was Russell's real power. Not the bylaws. Not the letterhead. The little permissions. The way a person could make you wait 3 months for a fence, or send your paint sample back twice, or tell the landscaping committee that your drainage complaint was really a maintenance issue. "I'm not asking you to stand up at a meeting," I told Nate. "But if you have dates for those photos, I would like them." He sent them that evening. He also found an old email chain with the county stormwater office about delayed access after a branch had fallen near the inspection path. That mattered. Not because it was dramatic, but because it showed the access route had been used and acknowledged before Russell decided my driveway was a design flaw. The second HOA letter arrived 6 days after that. This one had a different feel. Less neighborly. More polished. It referenced a compliance review and attached a memorandum from someone named Tessa Monroe, a consultant I had not met yet. I met her the next morning. She appeared at the curb with a laser measuring tool, a tablet, and white shoes too clean for fieldwork. Russell was not with her. That was smart. Consultants look more neutral when the person paying them stays home. "Miss Vale," she said. "Tessa Monroe, Property Compliance Review. Do you have the full recorded plat packet?" I asked. "Or only the exhibit the association sent you?" She smiled in a way that had been practiced. "I have the materials necessary for today's assessment." That was not an answer. She measured the width of the apron. She measured the distance to the curb cut. She photographed the concrete seam. What she did not do was walk to the side fence where the county marker sat half covered by liriope. "The access marker is over there," I said. She glanced at it. "My scope today is visual frontage compliance. The violation is about concrete that exists because of recorded access. I understand your position." That sentence is a small locked door. I watched her finish. I did not argue, because there was nothing to win on the curb. She had been hired to answer a narrow question, and narrow questions produce narrow answers. Her memo came 2 days later. Apparent driveway expansion. Visual nonconformity. No visible necessity for apron width beyond owner convenience. I printed it, sat at the breakfast table, and marked every sentence that depended on not reading the full plat. There were 7. That memo was supposed to make the HOA look stronger. In a way, it did. But it also made their mistake more expensive, because now the board had taken a records problem, hired a consultant to avoid the records, and put the avoidance in writing. The final compliance demand arrived the following Monday. 10 days. That was the new deadline. Remove the non-conforming driveway apron within 10 days, or the association may complete corrective remediation and assess costs to the owner account. The sentence I saved was in the second paragraph. Access to common drainage infrastructure is not implicated by this matter. I read that line 3 times. Then I took out a yellow sticky note and wrote, in all capitals, provably wrong. That was not anger. It was a filing category. I emailed Priya Shah at the county stormwater office. I did not ask her to fight my HOA. County staff do not exist to settle neighborhood arguments, and if you ask them to do that, they will usually retreat into language so careful it becomes useless. I asked a records question. I attached the recorded plat, the maintenance agreement, photos of the driveway access, Nate's flooding pictures, and the HOA letter claiming drainage was not implicated. Then I asked whether the recorded inspection access shown on the plat was still active and whether obstruction or removal of the driveway apron could affect county access. Priya replied the next afternoon. Her email was exactly what I expected from a competent public employee. Careful, limited, and very useful. The county cannot provide interpretation of private HOA covenants or adjudicate owner association disputes, she wrote. However, the recorded stormwater inspection access shown on Plat Book 41, page 288, remains part of the county's drainage inspection records. Access should not be obstructed or altered in a manner that prevents inspection or maintenance review. That was all I needed. Not a victory. Not a threat. A sentence tied to a recorded document. 3 mornings later, Leon Briggs rolled up with the saw. Now you understand why I did not shout. When I asked Leon about written indemnity, he looked at Russell, and Russell did what people do when they are used to being obeyed. He increased volume slightly and decreased substance. This is association-authorized remediation, Russell said. The owner has been notified repeatedly. Leon did not move. Mr. Pike, is there a drainage access here? Russell gave a short laugh. This is a driveway conformity issue. That was not what I asked. I opened the blue folder and handed Leon the recorded plat. Not the whole stack. Just the page with the lot lines and the access route. He held it carefully, like paper could become a tool if he did not bend it wrong. I pointed to the line crossing the apron. That is the access route. That notation is the part missing from the exhibit the HOA has been using. Russell stepped closer. Marianne, you have already submitted your interpretation. This is not my interpretation. This is the recorded plat. Leon looked down the side yard toward the marker. Then he looked at the orange paint. His face changed. Not fear. Calculation. Contractors know liability. Good ones know it before lawyers have to explain it to them. Do you have the maintenance agreement? He asked. I handed him the second page. He read more slowly this time. The younger man in the neon vest stopped pretending to adjust a cone and watched. Russell said, "We are not here to debate county paperwork." Leon gave him a look that did not belong to the HOA. It belonged to a man whose insurance premiums were not theoretical. If I cut through an access route after being shown this, Leon said, that is not a debate. That is my problem. Then I showed him Priya's email. He read the county letterhead, the plat reference, the line about access not being obstructed. He did not read it once. He read it twice. "I'm calling my office," he said. Russell's mouth tightened. Leon walked to the truck, phone to his ear, the plat still in his hand. I stood near the driveway edge. Russell stood near the curb. The saw sat on the ramp between us, quiet and useless. That is the image I remember most clearly. Not Russell's face. Not even the orange paint. The saw sitting there with nothing to do because a page from 1998 had finally entered the conversation. Leon came back after 5 minutes. "We are not cutting today," he said. Russell turned sharply. "The board authorized this work. Then the board can authorize written indemnity, county confirmation, and a revised work order acknowledging the drainage access. Until then, my company is not touching it. You are already here. Concrete can be cut once, Leon said. Lawsuits last longer. I liked him for that. Not because he was on my side. He was not. He was on the side of not doing something stupid with his saw, which was good enough. The crew loaded the equipment back onto the trailer. Russell did not argue in front of them after that. He had the sense to know when a public argument would make the wrong person look reasonable. Instead, he did what Russell did best. He changed the story. At 4:18 that afternoon, every homeowner in Briar Glen received an email from the board. Subject temporary delay in frontage remediation. It said a resident had prevented scheduled work related to driveway uniformity and neighborhood beautification. It said the board remained committed to consistent enforcement. It said misinformation about drainage infrastructure had complicated a routine matter. It did not mention the recorded plat. It did not mention the county email. It did not mention that the contractor had refused to cut. By dinner, I had 2 voicemails from neighbors who did not leave their names. One message from a woman asking why I was making the street look bad, and a text from Nate that said, I almost replied, but I don't want to make it worse. I told him not to reply. There are moments when defending yourself publicly only helps the person who framed you first. Russell wanted me emotional. He wanted a long neighborhood argument where the facts became personality. So I wrote one email. Dear board members, please include the full recorded plat, the drainage maintenance agreement, the HOA exhibit used in the enforcement packet, and all owner responses in the packet for any meeting concerning my driveway. Then I attached everything again. Certified mail went out the next morning. The special board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. That gave me 6 days. I spent those 6 days making a binder boring enough to be dangerous. Tab 1 HOA notice. Tab 2 my first certified response. Tab 3 portal logs. Tab 4 recorded plat. Tab 5 drainage maintenance agreement. Tab 6 Tessa Monroe's consultant memo. Tab 7 Nate's flood photos and the old county email chain. Tab 8 Priya Shah's clarification. Tab 9 Contractor work order. Or as much of it as Leon was willing to provide after his office decided they wanted the record clear too. The printer jammed twice. I burned one piece of toast. At one point, I found myself using the same green ruler I had used in the records office for almost 20 years. And I had to sit down for a minute because some objects carry more of your life than they have any right to. Paul would have laughed at that binder. Not because it was silly, because it was exactly what he expected me to do. You don't argue, he used to say. You index. He was right. I printed the HOA's cropped exhibit on one sheet and the full recorded plat on another. I used transparent tabs so the board could see where the missing notation should have been. I highlighted only 3 lines. Too much highlighting makes people feel lectured. 3 lines makes them wonder why those 3 matter. I also left Priya a voicemail, asking whether, if the board had questions, she could clarify the access requirement in writing. She could not attend the meeting. She had inspections scheduled on the south side of the county. But she sent a short email that said the access route remained in county drainage records and that any proposed alteration should be reviewed before work occurred. Again, careful. Again, enough. The hard part of those 6 days was not the binder. The hard part was living in the neighborhood while the wrong version of the story moved faster than the documents. On Wednesday morning, I walked to the mailbox and saw 2 women from the landscaping committee slow down at the corner. They did not stop talking. They simply lowered their voices in that synchronized way people do when the subject of the sentence becomes visible. One of them gave me a small smile. The other studied the sidewalk. I do not blame them as much as I could. Most people are busy. They read the first email that sounds official and file the matter away. A board says remediation. A board says beautification. A board says a homeowner is preventing routine work. That is enough for people who have their own bills, their own jobs, their own parents to call and prescriptions to pick up. That is why official language is powerful. It saves people the effort of wondering. On Thursday, a man named Craig from the cul-de-sac stopped his truck beside my mailbox. "I don't want to get in the middle," he said, which meant he was already there. All right. But if everybody starts ignoring the standards, the neighborhood changes. I looked at his truck, then at the driveway, then back at him. Do you know what standard they say I violated? Driveway width, I guess. Do you know why the driveway is that width? He opened his mouth, then closed it. To his credit, he did not invent an answer. "No," he said. "That is the part they left out." He tapped the steering wheel twice. Russell said there was misinformation. There is. That is why I am bringing the recorded plat to the meeting. Craig did not apologize. He nodded once and drove off. It was not a victory, but it was a small hole in the wall Russell had built. That evening, Nate came by with a thumb drive. "More photos," he said, "from the April storm." He looked embarrassed by the usefulness of them. There were pictures of his back fence with water pushing against the bottom rail, leaves gathered near the culvert, and one image of a county worker standing near my side yard in a rain jacket. I had forgotten that visit. Nate had not. "You do not have to speak Tuesday," I told him. He looked down at the thumb drive in my hand. "I know. Russell will make it unpleasant. He already has." That was the first time I understood Nate had moved from fear to anger. Quietly, but still. "If I say something," he asked, "what do I say?" "The truth. Only what you know. No guesses." He nodded, relieved by the narrowness of that. People think testimony means speeches. It usually means not reaching past what you can prove. On Friday, I called Leon's office. Not Leon directly. His office. I asked for a copy of the work order or, if they could not provide that, a written statement of what information had been provided before mobilization. The woman who answered put me on hold long enough for me to make tea. When she came back, her tone had changed. "Mr. Briggs can send a brief email confirming the job was suspended pending documentation review," she said. "That would be helpful." He also asked me to say the crew will not return without a revised authorization. "I appreciate that." She paused. "For what it is worth, Mom, he was not happy about being sent into that. Neither was I." The email came 20 minutes later. It was short, but it gave me another piece of the chain. Contractor arrived. Owner presented recorded access, documentation, work suspended, pending review. It did not take my side. It did something better. It described the sequence. By Saturday afternoon, the binder was finished. I placed it on the breakfast table and made myself walk away from it. There comes a point when preparation turns into fear wearing a useful hat. I had the documents. I had the order. I had the receipts. Reading them for the 9th time would not make them stronger. So I watered the basil on the back step. I changed the air filter. I watched rain gather along the edge of the patio and move downhill the way it was supposed to move. That last part mattered. The whole argument had started because the HOA wanted the front of the property to look simpler than the land actually was. But land remembers. Water especially remembers. It follows grade, not authority. It does not care who won the last board election. By Tuesday, I was calm enough to be useful. The clubhouse was fuller than I expected. Briar Glen's clubhouse was not really a clubhouse. It was a rectangular room behind the pool office, with folding chairs, a counter nobody cleaned well, and a framed photo of the subdivision entrance from 15 years ago, when all the shrubs were still the same size. Russell sat at the center of the front table. Tessa Monroe sat to his right. Two board members sat on his left, Carol Vance, the treasurer, who rarely spoke but always read the financial packet, and Tim Rooker, who looked uncomfortable before the meeting even started. Leon Briggs sat in the back row. That surprised me. He gave me a small nod. Not friendly. Professional. Nate sat near the aisle with his arms folded and his eyes on the floor. Russell opened with the usual items. Pool gate. Irrigation repairs. Reminder about trash bins. He was smooth through all of it. Then he reached my item. We need to address the delayed remediation at 118 Briar Glen Court, he said. Not Marianne's driveway. Not drainage access. Delayed remediation. That was Russell's talent. He named things in ways that made his conclusion feel built in. He described my driveway as an unapproved alteration. He said the board had attempted voluntary compliance. He said repeated owner submissions had failed to establish an exemption from frontage standards. Then he introduced Tessa. Tessa stood with her tablet. Her presentation was clean. I will give her that. Photos, measurements, references to visual continuity. One slide showing the cropped map with my driveway circled. She said the apron appeared inconsistent with neighboring lots. She said her scope did not include drainage engineering. She said, based on the materials provided, the board had a reasonable basis to pursue compliance. Based on the materials provided. I wrote that down even though I already knew I would remember it. Russell asked if the board had questions. Carol Vance looked at the slide. Is that the full plat? Tessa paused. Russell answered for her. It is the relevant portion. That was when I stood up. May I respond? Russell's smile stayed in place, but it thinned. Briefly, he said. I took my binder to the front table. I did not look at the room first. Looking at a room invites you to perform. I looked at the documents. This is the exhibit the association has used in all 3 notices. I said. I placed the cropped map on the table. And this is the full recorded plat from the county records office. I placed the full page beside it. The room did not react all at once. Rooms rarely do. First, Carol leaned forward. Then Tim. Then a man in the second row squinted. Then somebody behind me whispered, "What is that line?" I pointed to the notation. Stormwater inspection access. Then I pointed to the same place on the HOA exhibit. Blank, because the image had been cut off before the notation. That line is missing from the version the association relied on. Russell said, the owner has repeatedly attempted to shift the issue. I turned one page. This is my first response, sent through the portal and by certified mail. It included the full plat. This is the postal receipt. This is the portal confirmation showing received. This is the later portal status showing insufficient documentation without explanation. Carol picked up the receipt. I kept going. This is the maintenance agreement recorded with the subdivision. It assigns the association responsibility to preserve access for stormwater inspection and maintenance review. This is the county email confirming that the access remains in county drainage records. This is the consultant memo stating drainage was not implicated. And this is the HOA's final demand, making that same claim after receiving the full plat. That was the first real silence of the meeting. Russell did not lose his temper. That would have been easier for him, in a way. Instead, he leaned into composure. There is a difference, he said, between access in theory and an oversized driveway in practice. I nodded. That is a fair question. It is also the question the board should have asked before sending a contractor. Then Nate stood. He did not want to. You could see it. His shoulders were tight, and he held his phone like he might need it to steady himself. My yard is one of the downhill lots, he said. The county used that route after the storm 2 summers ago. I have pictures. When the culvert clogs, The water backs up fast. Russell looked at him like a man discovering a quiet person had a voice. Nate, this is not about your yard. Carol said, It might be. That was the moment the room changed. Not because everyone suddenly understood easements. Most people do not, and that is fine. The room changed because the issue stopped being Marianne making trouble and became the board possibly cutting off drainage access that affected other homes. Leon stood next. He did not come to the front. He spoke from the back row. For the record, he said, my company was not provided the full plat or the county email before arriving for the work. Russell turned red from the neck up. Leon continued. Once Ms. Vale showed us the documents, I stopped the job. We will not perform cutting or removal there without written indemnity, county confirmation, and a revised work order acknowledging the drainage access issue. Tessa said, Contractor risk assessment is outside the scope of my review. I looked at Carol, not Tessa. That is the problem, I said. The board hired a scope narrow enough to miss the thing that mattered. Carol turned to Tessa. Did you review the full recorded plat? Tessa took a breath. I reviewed the materials provided by the association. There it was. Not a confession. Something better. In a practical sense. A clean transfer of responsibility back to the people at the table. Tim Rooker rubbed his forehead. Russell, did we have the full plat before the contractor was sent? Russell opened his folder. Folders are wonderful when they contain the answer. They are less useful when everyone in the room already knows what the answer is. The owner submitted multiple documents, he said. Their relevance was disputed. Carol said, By whom? No one spoke. That silence did more work than I could have done in 10 minutes. Russell tried one more route. Even if the access exists, he said, the association still has the authority to enforce appearance standards. It was the best argument he had left, and I respected it enough to answer carefully. Yes, I said. The association has authority to enforce valid standards. But that authority does not include destroying or narrowing a recorded access route without reviewing the document that created it. If the board wants to propose a different way to preserve access and satisfy frontage standards, it can do that through the proper review. What it cannot do is send a saw first and call the records irrelevant afterward. Carol looked at the maintenance agreement again. Who maintains the access markers? She asked. The association, I said. Russell said. Those markers have not been maintained in years. That is also an association problem. That one landed harder than I expected. A few people in the room shifted. Not because it was clever, because it was simple. The HOA had treated the faded marker as proof the access did not matter, when the fading was actually evidence of their own neglected duty. Tim asked Leon, if the marker had been clear, would your crew have cut? Leon shook his head. No. If the full plat had been in your packet? No. If the county email had been provided? Absolutely not. 3 no answers can do a lot in a room full of people who arrived expecting one stubborn homeowner. Tessa tried to recover the scope issue. My review was never presented as a drainage or easement analysis, she said. But your memo was used to justify remediation, Carol replied. Tessa looked at Russell. Russell looked at his folder again. The folder did not help him the second time either. The board did not withdraw the violation that night. That would have been too clean, and real things are rarely clean while people are still saving face. They voted to pause enforcement pending review. Carol insisted the full packet be sent to the county stormwater office. Tim seconded it. Russell voted no, which was his right and his mistake. 2 days later, Priya Shah came to the property. She arrived in a county vehicle at 9:30 inches the morning with a tablet, a measuring wheel, and the calm expression of someone who had seen private communities turn maintenance obligations into personal dramas before. She walked the driveway. She checked the side marker. She followed the access route along the utility strip and looked down toward Nate's yard. Nate came out and stayed near his fence, not wanting to intrude but unable to pretend he was not invested. Priya did not make speeches. She took photos. She confirmed the plat reference. She asked whether any cutting had occurred. I said no. Good, she said. That was the closest she came to editorial comment. Nate finally walked over while Priya was measuring the side path. Do you need to see where the water backs up? He asked. Priya looked at him. If you have observed recurring backup, yes. He led us along the fence line to the low corner of his yard. He had placed a little wooden stake there after the last storm, marking the water line. It was not dramatic. It was not chest-deep flooding or a rescue scene. It was 8 inches of standing water against a fence, which is exactly the kind of problem people ignore until it becomes foundation damage. Mosquitoes. And insurance letters. Priya photographed the stake. How often? She asked. Twice in the last 3 years, Nate said. Both times after the grate clogged. And county access came through Ms. Vale's side. Yes. She entered something on the tablet. Russell did not attend the site visit. He sent Tim instead, which was the first sensible thing he had done. Tim stood near the curb with his hands in his pockets, watching Priya work. I did not know any of this, he said to me quietly. You had the documents. He looked down. I know. That is not an apology, but it is often the sentence that comes before one. If a person is capable of getting there. Priya finished at the marker and asked for a copy of the maintenance agreement, even though she already had the recorded reference. I had one ready. She smiled when I handed it to her in a sleeve. Records office, she asked. 31 years. I can tell. That was the only compliment I needed that week. The county notice went to the HOA the following Monday. It was not dramatic. It did not accuse anyone of fraud. It did not threaten a giant fine. It was better than that. It was official, narrow, and hard to argue with. The notice stated that the stormwater inspection access shown on the recorded plat remained active in county drainage records. It requested confirmation that no owner association action would obstruct, narrow, or alter the access route without county review. It requested that faded access markers be refreshed so future maintenance vendors could identify the route. It also asked the association to provide updated contact information for drainage maintenance coordination. In other words, the county told the HOA to protect the thing they had tried to cut. Russell sent a neighborhood update that evening. The board has temporarily paused driveway enforcement at 118 Briar Glen Court pending additional drainage review. Temporarily paused. Additional review. No apology. No correction. No mention that the county had just asked them to mark the access route. I read it, folded the paper, and put it in the binder. This is the part where some people expect me to say I marched to Russell's house or sent a reply to the whole neighborhood. I did not. There are times to answer publicly and times to let the next official document do the answering. Russell's email was not the final record. It was a man trying to stand on a rug while the rug was being pulled from under him, slowly enough that he could pretend he had chosen to move. So I waited. Waiting is not passive when you have already put the evidence where it belongs. During those 3 weeks, the neighborhood changed in small ways. Craig from the cul-de-sac waved at the mailbox and looked mildly ashamed of himself. One of the landscaping committee women asked whether the county marker had always been there. I told her yes. She said she had never noticed it. Most people didn't need to, I said. Nate began copying me on emails to the board about the drainage swale, but he kept them factual. Date, condition, photo attached. No insults. No speeches. I was proud of him for that. though I did not say it in a way that would embarrass him. Carol requested a special records review for all open enforcement matters involving property boundaries, drainage, setbacks, or utility easements. I only know that because Tim told me later in the grocery store, standing by the apples. Carol is making us attach source documents now, he said. Good. Russell hates it. Also good. He almost laughed. The board also had to call Leon's company. Leon told them the same thing he had said in the meeting: no cutting, no narrowing, no removal without county confirmation, and written indemnity. His office put it in writing this time. That was important. Once a vendor puts risk in writing, a board cannot pretend the risk is only the homeowner's opinion. 3 weeks later, the real letter came. Dear Ms. Vale, following review of recorded subdivision documents, county stormwater records, and related maintenance obligations, the association hereby withdraws the driveway frontage violation issued for 118 Briar Glen Court. No remediation costs will be assessed to your owner account. There was more. A paragraph about updating compliance procedures. A sentence about reimbursing reasonable document reproduction and certified mailing costs. A line thanking me for my patience during review. That line made me laugh. Not loudly. Just enough that the kitchen felt less heavy. Patience sounds like a virtue when someone else writes it in a letter. While you are living through it, patience feels more like standing still while somebody else swings a tool near your house. The HOA repainted the access markers the next month. Not orange. Blue. A small blue dashed line near the edge of the apron and a discreet marker by the side fence. Most neighbors never noticed. Nate did. After the first hard rain that spring, he texted me a picture of water moving cleanly through the swale. Looks boring, he wrote. Best kind of drainage, I replied. Russell did not resign right away. People like Russell rarely leave at the moment they should. His authority thinned first. Carol started asking for source documents before votes. Tim requested that outside consultants identify what materials they had reviewed. The architectural committee stopped approving enforcement packets without record attachments. Tessa Monroe's invoice, I heard, became a subject of discussion. Not because her measurements were wrong. Because the board had paid for confidence and received a memo that depended on missing context. Leon Briggs sent me a copy of his revised company policy 2 months later. Any HOA-ordered concrete removal now required a utility and easement review before mobilization. That may have been my favorite outcome. Not because it punished anyone, because it meant the next homeowner might not have to stand in a driveway at 7-10 inches the morning while a saw came off a trailer. There was one more meeting after that, and I went even though my issue was technically over. The agenda called it Compliance Process Updates. That sounded harmless enough to put half the room to sleep, but it mattered more than most of the dramatic parts. Carol presented the changes. Any enforcement involving structures, drainage, setbacks, easements, fences, trees, driveways, or recorded property restrictions would require the full source document, not a cropped image. Any consultant memo had to list the documents reviewed. Any forced remediation required vendor acknowledgement of known property records and utility conflicts. Portal status changes had to include a reason. That last one was mine, though nobody said so. Russell sat through it with his face arranged into neutrality. When the vote passed, he said he supported process improvement. I believe that about as much as I believed the original cropped map was the relevant portion. But public agreement has its uses. Once people say the right thing into minutes, they can be held to it later. After the meeting, a woman I barely knew stopped me near the door. I got a roof notice last month, she said. They attached a guideline summary, not the actual rule. Ask for the rule. Just ask. Ask in writing. She nodded, as if that was both obvious and new. That is how these things spread when they spread well. Not as neighborhood war. Not as revenge. As one person learning to ask for the document under the summary. When I got home, the blue marker at the edge of the driveway caught the porch light. It was small. Most people would never see it. But I did, and for the first time since the first notice arrived, it did not feel like a target. It felt like a label finally put back where it belonged. People ask me if the county map won. The answer is no. The map helped. The map mattered. But a map sitting in a drawer does not stop anything. What mattered was the sequence. The first letter was answered. The answer was sent 2 ways. The receipt was saved. The portal change was printed. The neighbor's photos were dated. The consultant memo was compared against the record it ignored. The county was asked a question it could actually answer. The contractor was shown the liability before the blade touched the concrete. None of that is exciting while you are doing it. It is paper. It is toner. It is waiting on hold. It is finding the old file label your husband wrote and realizing your hands are shaking a little, then making yourself keep going anyway. But that is how ordinary people keep power when the person across from them has a title, a logo, or a louder voice. They keep the record. The morning Leon stopped the saw, Russell wanted me to argue about whether my driveway looked wrong. I would have lost that argument, or at least I would have been trapped inside it, because appearance is slippery. One person's improvement is another person's violation. One board's standard is another board's mistake. So I did not argue appearance. I asked what recorded document the rule was standing on. That is a useful question. If your HOA cites a fence, a driveway, a drainage line, a setback, a tree, a roof, or anything attached to land, ask for the document under the document. Not the summary. Not the screenshot. Not the board packet with half the page missing. The recorded plat. The permit. The maintenance agreement. The easement. The inspection note. The receipt showing who knew what and when. You do not need to be loud when the paper is complete. Concrete saws are loud. They are designed to be loud. They make everyone nearby feel like something irreversible is already happening. But that morning, the saw never touched my driveway. One county map, one careful email, and one contractor smart enough to read both did what shouting would not have done. They made the work stop. And sometimes, before you can win anything, that is the whole point. If this story helped you think twice about the paperwork behind an HOA notice, subscribe. There are more stories like this, and most of them begin the same way, with someone assuming the quiet person did not keep receipts.